This goes for a bit over an hour. And then we're glad you watched it. Niel Oliver and Gareth Icke. Ooh, I tried on a duck. Bark like a mouse. That was it. I tried on a mouse and it barked like a duck. Yeah, I know. Look. I know. I don't care. I don't care. As Ricky Gervais says. I think you'll find you'll agree with a lot of this.
That's coming up with me and my friend Gareth Icke. I got a great deal from it. Just one of those, you know, I hope all of you have people out there with whom you can chat, and no matter the content, just the experience of sharing it with that person just makes you feel better. And that's how I felt about the upcoming conversation. I hope you do too. We'll get to it as fast as we can. As I say, just let me tell you how you can support what I do here, what we do here. Just go to patreon.com if you can, if you would, part with a little bit of cash, and it keeps all of this going, makes all of this possible. We're talking about the price of a cup of coffee here. The whole wider experience, well, besides some of this stuff, history, archaeology, comment, current affairs, question and answer sessions, light-hearted stuff too, and a lot of feedback from the regulars. I'm sure you'll love it. The link is in the notes below the video, and I'd love to see you there. While I'm on the subject of supporting the channel, let me tell you about our sponsors. They are Gold Bullion Partners. They're about buying, holding real precious metal. Gold and silver, last thing they say, buying gold and silver is about wealth preservation, safety and control, not speculation. If you're in the market, as it were, to hold some real gold, to hold some real silver, a mixture of both, they're the people to talk to as far as I'm concerned. You get to talk to real people. It's not just an impersonal website, it's actual people. Get talking to them, see if it's right for you, and if it is, go on.
Myself, I'm not into the whole gold and silver thing. They're just shiny rocks. You can't eat them. Like, look, it depends on how things go. But I don't think it's going to be anything that'll be any use to us, to be honest. It's only useful to somebody else.
Ed? Okay, now let's get to Gareth.
Go away. I don't like ads. Hang on.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining me again. My guest this morning, who I barely need to introduce, Gareth Icke. We've just been struggling through technological problems, and the fact that we're still speaking to each other at all is remarkable, given the frustration that wrestling with technology can induce in every sane person. That said, Gareth, great to see you. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, mate. Great to see you. Technology failing is like, it's like road rage, isn't it? I think it's because its sole function is to work. So when it doesn't, it's like, what is the point of you? But we're there in the end.
I find I have a certain kind of patience, but things like the pots and pans in the pot drawer, if they don't cooperate with me immediately, I'm instantly ready to kick a puppy through a fan. I don't know what it is about inanimate objects. And likewise with technology and software, if it doesn't do what I want it to do when I want to do it, I just want to bring out my inner Hulk and smash. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Although I am mellowing. I think my kids are mellowing me. So as you can see where I am, like I'm in the bedroom because I'm normally in the studio, but my eldest was up vomiting all night, right? And at one point, and apologies if you're eating, ladies and gentlemen, it splashed and actually landed on my lip. So once you get to that point, I'm just kind of just relaxed now. It can't get any worse. It's fine. Today's fine.
It's fine. You're in the solitude of a bedroom.
Yeah.
You know, with everything, everyone listening, audience out there, in these increasingly crazy and getting crazier all the times, I turn to an increasingly small number of people who I feel as if I don't have to explain anything to. And Gareth is one of those. Gareth is one of those that I would put in the category of someone I could just go to the pub with and talk to without feeling the necessity to check what I can and can't talk about. And so it's a great relief to me, to be in this space with you, Gareth. And what I would say is, as I say, with things being as they are, obviously what's happening in the Middle East, throughout the Middle East, focused on Iran and Israel, with the US obviously blundering in there as per usual. We can get into all of it, but I suppose what I want to hear from you is, how do you feel, Gareth? Because I feel as though someone somewhere is just shaking the ant jar, and that it doesn't matter to them if at the end of the shake just all of the ants are dead. It feels like chaos for the sake of chaos. How do you feel?
I think that's exactly what it is. And I think that's what Donald Trump is and always was, is a chaos agent. He's perfect for it. You know, even when he came along in 2016 as this sort of fake outsider, he created a huge polarization where you either loved him or hated him. There was very few people I remember back then that would be like, well, Donald Trump, yeah, he's all right. It was like you had Trump derangement syndrome in the love for him, or you had Trump derangement syndrome in the hate for him, and that was the sort of polarization. And I think he's just gone from strength to strength in terms of that chaos. But what I find so strange at the minute, Neil, is it's quite confusing in the sense that us that would probably consider ourselves maybe anti-establishment, for want of a sort of more in-depth term, that would like to kind of destroy the status quo in a way, because it's not great. And, you know, people talk about the new normal. Well, the old normal wasn't great, you know. So we would like to probably bring down the establishment, the Epstein class, and build a better world for us and our kids and grandkids, whatever. But then the establishment itself also wants to destroy the status quo, but not for the same end goals as us. They don't want this beautiful world where we can all get along to a certain degree. They want a technological surveillance state, AI run dystopia. But at the moment we're aligned, which I find so confusing, and I think it creates this confusion within a lot of Trump supporters, because they'll look at certain, not the Iran war, of course, but certain things before, they'll look at and go, but I wanted him to do that. Like, that makes sense. And it's like, well, yes, because he's destroying the status quo, which I get you want as well. And it's like, it's almost like you've got this huge eyesore, a derelict building eyesore, and the people want to pull it down so they can build some massive homestead and home education thing for the kids. And the establishment want to bring it down as well. They want to tear it down as well. But they want to build a flaming concentration camp on the spot. But at that point of pulling down the eyesore, we're aligned. And I find that
so you think
quite
we've
strange.
Have we, in the loosest possible term, have we been made unwitting or unwilling accomplices to destruction? In the mistaken belief that when we get the brownfield site, we can build something better. But the final sucker punch is that when the brownfield site has been created by total devastation, they're going to build something even uglier.
Exactly that. And I would say that politicians and democracy, for whatever that means these days, I think is on the chopping block as well. And I think they want us to almost demand it. So what they're doing is on one hand, they've given us not all the files, but a certain amount of files, which lets even the most, ardent sort of head in the sand person know that actually a lot of these world leaders and so-called elected officials are paedophiles and murderers and everything else. So that's not great. And then on the other hand, particularly in the UK, but so you can apply Trump to this, you've got basically the most moronic among us elevated to positions of perceived power. So you think Ed Miliband, I mean, the guy's a moron. David Lammy is a moron. Rachel Reeves is a moron. Like, all these people are elevated. to a point where I think what they want to do is bring in the technocracy, but they want us to ask for it, because that seems to be how it works. It's like we have to invite the vampire in.
I ask myself that every time something dribbles onto my timeline like a stillborn calf in the form of Ed Miliband or whoever. I think, are they stupid? Are they elevated morons? Because on the face of it, see, Ed Miliband seems to be a very educated person, and he seems on the face of it to have had at some point the potential to be a fairly intelligent and sorted person. But obviously, what he promotes and what he pushes to people like us, it makes him seem like an imbecile. So what is it? Does he believe what he's saying? Is he utterly somehow MK Ultra brainwashed, persuaded of the nonsense that comes out of his mouth? So is he genuine insofar as he believes he's doing right, or is he knowingly lying?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? How many of these people are just stupid but arrogant and narcissistic? I would put Lammy in that. I don't think Lammy's very bright, but I think he's arrogant and narcissistic enough to believe he's really, really bright. So I think there's that element. There's those that will be doing as they're told because of compromat, and the Epstein files have shown us enough evidence of that. And then I think there's the other one where, you get the likes of Tony Blair, for instance, who would work for Satan for free. Like, they know what they're doing every step of the way. Where Ed Miliband sits in that, I'm not sure. But either way, what it creates, even if it's just an illusion of being an idiot, is it gives them the cover of incompetence as an excuse. Oh, it's incompetence. So the population look at politics and they go, right, they're either in the Epstein files, complete wrong-uns, or they're so moronic and incompetent, they're dragging the country to its knees. And then someone comes along with, well, what about this? Have you thought about maybe a technocracy? Maybe actually we select officials that are experts as opposed to ever seeing a polling booth. And you have geared the population to get to a point where they go, well, that doesn't sound great, but it can't be any worse than these lot. And so in the end, you kind of almost ask for that in a way, or at least accept it. And even Reform have said if they win the next election, then there would be a certain percentage of their cabinet, their cabinet that wouldn't be elected, but would be selected and put into a position. Then you're like, and that's supposed to be the alternative. Obviously, I don't believe Reform are the alternative, but you can see how this kind of stepping stone towards that, election-free, will give you experts rather than elected officials. Could people are being prepared for it, and I think a lot of people would, probably accept it, actually. Like I say, because it's an attitude of, well, it can't be any worse than this, right? That's broadly where I am. Amorphous though it is, that I am in that cloud with you. Where in that do you position what I sense is the growing, is the word tolerance? Is it blindness towards whatever? But the death tolls that are entailed and entrained in obviously what's been happening in Ukraine for years now, but more recently the genocide in Gaza, and then you move on to Iran, and just as a hellish, horrifying case study what happened at the school for the girls. There's this building tolerance, it would appear, amongst larger and larger swathes of the population, that this kind of horror just has to happen. The death of children, and or the trafficking of children, and or the torture and abuse and murder of children, it is somehow normalised to the extent that if and when we get to the point where maybe the people have accepted this technocracy as being better than what we were made to witness before, will that seeming tolerance of obscenity be somehow in that omelette as well? it's certainly become normalised, hasn't it? I think what's done it a lot is it's been like it for a while, where it doesn't really matter what's happening, it matters who's doing it in terms of people's minds. The Trump supporters are great for that. You know, I've said for a while, you know, a red baseball cap with "It's okay when we do it" stitched on is what a lot of these people should be wearing. And so you can look at an instance where you go, look at October 7th. So you have these Israelis were killed. That's horrendous. You go, okay, well, what about the tens of thousands of children killed in Gaza? Well, whatever. And you're like, well, I don't know how people can square that circle. Like, killing is wrong. Period. Full stop. Like, for me personally, I don't see why there needs to be a caveat after that. But unfortunately, that's what's happened. It's like a tribal thing. It's my team, so that it's okay when my team do it. So when your team do it, that's horrendous. When my team do it, there's a justification for it. And you know, I think as a society, we should be at a point where there is absolutely no justification for murdering or trafficking children. Like, and that's weird to say that out loud, Neil, because the fact that you even need to say that there shouldn't be a caveat, which is unless, after a sentence like that. And if we as a species are at a point where we can justify the death of the most innocent among us, then I fear for our future, to be honest. I genuinely, I'm not one of these people that's fear like mongering. I don't worry about a mushroom cloud landing on my house. That's not something I open myself to. But I do fear for humanity if we get to a point where we can normalise paedophilia and normalise the death of kids and blowing up schools. Not once but twice, because the US hit that school twice in quick succession, so it wasn't an accident. And if you can look the other way on that, then I don't know where we go from there, mate, to be honest.
Yeah, because as I say, a case study in obscenity, that school was hit, and then someone either automatically, because it was a drone, or involving human oversight, it witnessed the gathering of first emergency services and parents. It was clear that some of the surviving children and teachers had run to an alternative building nearby, and then that was all hit.
Yeah.
The first responders, the parents trying to get there, and the children who hadn't been killed in the first strike, and the teachers that had tried to shepherd them somewhere, that was then hit by the second attack. And I don't see how anyone's behaviour towards anyone could descend any further than that.
Exactly. And the thing is, when it first happened, like, if you've been following this stuff and Middle East wars and Israel and the US actions abroad and whatever for long enough, you see the same pattern. So as soon as it happened, straight away, reflex action. It was the Iranians. They did it to themselves. It was an Iranian misfire. They did it to themselves. Every time a hospital was hit in Gaza by Israel, it was either a Hamas, base, or it was a Hamas rocket that did it. They did it to themselves. So it's the same thing. And then they try and keep that up for a while, and then all the evidence always points in the other direction, and they get to a point where they can't deny it anymore. So then they say, oh, we'll do an investigation, which is the equivalent to marking your own homework. They determined it was a mistake, even though, as you've said, in this instance, quite blatantly was intentional. And then they'll eventually admit that, and action will be taken. Then the news cycle changes, and other things happen, and everyone focuses on something else. And nothing ever happens. Like we found that in the genocide in Gaza for 2 years. That they will investigate themselves. Yeah, but you look at the rape and torture of Palestinian prisoners. That was going to be investigated. Now they've just dropped charges, even though an abuse was caught on film. And what they did is Israel sacked the Israeli lawyer that leaked the footage, and didn't press charges against the rapists. So that's the society we're dealing with. This is the mindset we're dealing with America and Israel and Britain and the West in general, to be fair, that actually these lives aren't important, and that's how they view it. And you know, when people say never again and all that sort of stuff, how did the Nazis do what the Nazis did? How did they dehumanize people to a point where they look the other way? People can't fathom that out. I remember as a kid learning about certain parts from history, and I couldn't compute, Neil. I was like, but why didn't anyone say anything? Like, couldn't. And then you've got that happening now, where first of all, it was, we're going into Iran to free the Iranians, free them of their lives. But now you've got Donald Trump speaking about how Iranians have got lesser genetics, and you're like, oh, we are going down the same path all over again. We are basically, as Israel has with Palestinians, they're animals. They call them animals. So you literally dehumanize them to the point where they're no longer human. Therefore, never mind, dogs die all the time, don't they? And that's happening now.
I'm exactly that. I'm a decade older than you or whatever, but I remember that all of that at school, never again, and the lesson that I got, which I'm pretty sure it wasn't subtle, was that in the future the only way to stop this happening was for anyone to, if they could smell smokes, shout fire, and if it turns out to have been nothing, well, fine, don't worry about it, but at least you raised the alarm. But if it actually is a fire, then we can deal with the fire. That was what I got from Never Again, that you have to not be slow to point out that it was possibly beginning. Don't wait until it's a conflagration that you can't extinguish. Get to it while it's still smouldering. And then I found, in my adulthood, I had occasion to be on television, and I said that during the COVID debacle, that I thought that othering people on the grounds that they were full of disease and they were to be shunned at the very least, if not rounded up and dealt with as some kind of, unclean vectors of the bubonic plague. That has happened before. Othering people on the grounds of a disease was tried before in Europe in the 20th century, in the Middle Years, and look where it ended up. And I was instantly labelled as anti-Semitic for that. Yeah. Because I was told, comparing what was happening now to the Holocaust, and that there's a law that says you can't suggest that anything is reminding you of the Holocaust, because if you do, you're an anti-Semite. And that was my experience. That was the point at which I became labelled in that way. And so I don't know now how to from that moment on, I didn't know how to proceed.
That's the point.
I didn't know what to do. I thought, well, I'm pretty sure that 40 years ago I was told to do this.
Yeah.
Now I've done it.
That's the point, though. I mean, the Holocaust has become an industry, and anti-Semitism as a label has become an industry, which basically acts as a protection racket for the state of Israel. That's what it is. And to be honest, I think that is more offensive, grossly offensive to the memories of genuine victims of the Holocaust than you comparing it in the COVID period. But for some reason that isn't how a lot of people view it. It's the go-to thing. Although, to be fair, it's not the same. I mean, you would have got called an anti-Semite then, and I imagine that would have rocked you a little bit. And that's how it used to be. I've called out Israel since the mid-2000s. I went over to Israel, played against Israel actually in beach soccer, and I saw things that didn't align with what I'd been taught, and so I looked into it, and in the end, came to my own conclusions. And I remember the first time I was called anti-Semitic. I was livid. I was offended, I was upset, I did the usual, mate, I've got Jewish friends, that one that just is almost like a meme now, isn't it, as a response, yeah. But it's true. And I was going, hang on a minute, what are you talking about? Whereas now, if you get called it, yeah, right, whatever, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And that in itself is not a good thing. Because it's like through the period when everything was racist, suddenly when everything's racist, nothing is. And if everything's transphobic or sexist or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, then nothing is. So in the end, you end up in a situation where you will have genuine situations and genuine, grounds to be fearful or whatever, and no one takes them seriously because everyone's racist, aren't they? So it doesn't matter, and that in itself is a slippery slope, I think.
What has dawned on me, and it started to dawn on me a few years ago now, but it's still relatively new to me, that one of the problems with totalitarianism is if one side wins, one group wins, and utterly neutralises or destroys everyone else, there's nothing to keep that group grounded in any way. There's nothing to inhibit that behaviour. And you might think if you're in that group that's great, because now you've got the total freedom to impose whatever you want to impose. But what I've begun to realise is that what happens is that group then just careers wildly out of control, because as it turns out, it was the presence of the opposition that was creating a tension that, in the manner of a big top in the circus, was holding up the whole thing that everyone was inside, happily or unhappily. It was the things pulling in all these different directions that actually created a structure. And if at any one point there was only one rope with any tension on it in that big top analogy, then it just gets pulled. It just gets pulled down and becomes just a rag with some broken sticks and tangled rope.
If you've got heartburn, try this Gaviscon chewing gum.
Gaviscon works fast to neutralise acid in the stomach.
Tastes good.
New, great-tasting Gaviscon chewing gum.
Get back on deck in just 40 minutes with Cabot's Easy Deck. Wood calls for Cabot's.
And that's just one of the reasons to stay away from totalitarianism, because it pulls everything into the ditch, including the people that think they've won, especially the people that think they've won. And what we're describing, this way in which, if we get to where we're going, it's now going to include a version of humanity that, amongst many other things, is completely anaesthetised to horror. To all the worst things that you can allow yourself to contemplate for a moment, and then you put all that darkness out of your head. But now you realise that the worst of the worst things, and worse than that, there's already people out there doing that, and all of that is going to be in the version of humanity that presumably is going to be all that's left standing if and when we ever get to the end of this period of ant jar shaking.
Yeah, I remember when we met up in Stirling and we filmed together. We were walking, I think near Stirling Bridge actually, and me and you were just chatting. And this was at a time when wokeism and political correctness was still, the order of the day. And I remember saying to you, we were talking about that, and you said that you didn't really fear the wokeism so much. What you feared was the inevitable pendulum swing that was going to come back. And I think that's what's happened. Now, what we've got now is largely in response to all that stuff, where there was a large group of the population that were against wokeism, that were pro-free speech.
Yes. This is something I was saying. I've been saying this for a while. You think blue-haired Karen's a problem. Wait till the pendulum snaps back the other way. It's going to snap back quite violently. And then you'll fucking be worried. I said that. Those exact words. When I say the red and the blue is the pendulum of the grandfather clock of time. And the grandfather clock of time never stops swinging left and right. And it'll never settle in the middle. And sometimes it snaps back so violently, we think, Christ, what have we done? We wish that it had stayed the other way.
And what they've done is they've basically made free speech less abundant, but they've managed to neuter the opposition by telling them they're winning, for one, and that their team's winning and therefore it's fine. But actually what I'm seeing as well now is not only that pull over to the acceptance of horrendous actions, but also actually wokeism is actually starting to look not that bad in the eyes of some. So you've got people like Peter Hegseth, who I swear that guy's like, he's a lunatic. And he's talking about the fact that they're able to drop bombs in and do things in a way that they weren't allowed to before because wokeism was stopping it. And I'm thinking, well, okay, well, I'm anti-woke, right? I'm not into wokeism, but you're telling me that wokeism was stopping all these bombs getting dropped on kids. You're sort of selling wokeism to me then, mate. And it's like, how much is that going to swing back? And when it swings back again, it always swings further every time, doesn't it? And you have this, this right foot and left foot, and that takes you in that direction. And then there's a pendulum swing, as you've said, and then it goes off in that direction. But actually, the whole time, you're still walking the same path down towards a not very nice future, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I don't know how long I've been aware of Pete Hegseth now, but years now. And when I first encountered...
Yeah. As the pendulum swings left and right, it's still attached to the same grandfather clock of time. The grandfather clock of control. That ain't God's clock.
To them on, he was a talking head on podcasts. I went so far as to acquire and read the book that he co-wrote that was called The Battle for the American Mind, because it purported to be, and to some extent was, a consideration of the way in which children were no longer being educated, they were being indoctrinated. It was a thesis born of that thought, that we'd somehow moved away from education as you and I would want it to be, to some kind of brainwashing. And I thought, and then here we are now, and as you say, he's in charge of war.
Yeah.
As you say, and I think the form of words that I heard him use in the context you're describing was that it was an end to what he called politically correct war. Which is a slightly vague expression, but clearly what he meant by that was, we're not going to bother about how this looks. If children must be hit, and then as they're crawling from the burning wreckage with their hair on fire, hit them again, if that's what he means by an end to politically correct wars, then yes, as you say, it begins to make it look as if the wokeism was better than what he offers. Which is words coming out of my mouth that I never thought I'd hear.
No.
But I lived long enough to remember, I'm not going to be able to remember either the British soldier's name, and I'm not going to be able to trot out verbatim what he actually said, but there was a speech made during the Iraq War, which was it was a British senior officer giving a speech to troops saying that they had to be, words to the effect of, magnanimous in victory. That they had, they had to remember humanity and their humanity and to behave accordingly. And it was front pages everywhere. It was clipped out on the front of the Daily Mail, and it was the speech of the moment. And and we all know what we know now about what happened in Iraq 20 years ago and the devastation wrought, as a result. But nonetheless, at least the optics were about saying things that on the face of it sounded noble.
Yeah.
But then you come forward, as you say, to now, and we're actually listening to a commander say, we're just gonna flatten everybody, kill everybody. There's not going to be any ethics. There's not going to be any morality. We'll stop at nothing until everybody's dead.
Yeah.
And that's progress.
Maybe that's part of it, though. Maybe that is a conscious decision to say the quiet part out loud, because of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the destruction of the status quo, to try and bring in something else afterwards that, granted, will be worse, but that's not going to be the sales pitch to us. And so actually maybe Pete Hegseth is being given a microphone on purpose. Maybe Trump is being given a microphone on purpose to say these things, because you know they're saying them in private, and you know they're thinking them in private. But you can even apply that to our Home Secretary here, talking about the fact that she dreams of a day when there's a panopticon that has the eyes of the state on every person at all times. Like, we know they think that, but they don't normally say it. And they don't normally say it on a podcast where everyone can access it. So I wonder how much of this saying the quiet part out loud, telling the people in no uncertain terms, this is who we are and this is what we think of you, that actually that will in the end lead the people to react and say, as they always do, something needs to be done about this establishment, this political system doesn't work anymore, we need something else. And then, you know, like the old Blue Peter days, they come out and say, well, here's one I made earlier, and sell it to the population like that. And as I said, maybe the population say, well, it can't be any worse. You know, if we've got this guy he's not elected, but he's put in charge, he can't be any more of a psycho than Peter Hegseth, right? Or, you know, he can't be any more incompetent than David Lammy, right? And, well, yeah, they can.
I saw Donald Trump. It's such a smorgasbord of horror that's out there. You know, you can pick and choose any flavour you want. But he was on Air Force One, and I think Pete Hegseth was, you know, gurgling in the background, you know, like a ventriloquist dummy. But in response to some or other question, Donald Trump reheated the notion of beheaded babies.
Yes.
Now, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember all of that. I remember that being repeated and repeated and repeated, that 40 beheaded babies, 40 beheaded babies, 40 beheaded babies. And then by a slow process, it was gradually rewound up to and including the point where people speaking on behalf of the IDF had to say that had not happened. There was no evidence of that was, you know, the 40 was suspicious from the get-go because it reeked of 40 days and nights, which is this kind of, you know, significant number but essentially meaningless number that just means a lot. But they had to wind back and say, no, that never happened. No. And yet, like I say, that bit about, you know, living long enough to remember anything at all, now Donald Trump is saying it again as though it were ever true. And yeah. Pete Hegseth was in the background nodding along to it. And you think, well, I heard that the first time. I saw it and heard it repeated ad nauseum. Then I saw it cancelled out because apparently everyone had to admit that it had never happened, and certainly not in the way in which it was being described. And now it's back again.
Yeah, it's one of those. If you say it enough, it becomes true. But this is the thing where age, one of the few times when age is actually on your side, is I'm old enough to remember hearing all this before. You know, they're taking the babies out of the incubators. They're Assad's gassing his own people. Like all these things that they tried to use to manufacture consent for a conflict, that then they just, like you say, they kind of wound down. And the 40 beheaded babies can be, as a claim, can be traced back to one man who was an extremist settler who is a reservist in the IDF. I think his name is Ben Zion. It's obviously not his real name, but that's the name he goes by. He was the first to claim, as soon as there was a microphone put in front of him, he was the first to claim that they'd found 40 beheaded babies. That was then never verified by anyone. And as you say, even the IDF then had to say, well, there was no evidence for that. And, you know, trust me, if there was evidence for that, it would be round the clock, obviously, because it would be used to, as it has been, to justify the genocide of Gaza. So for the sitting president to be coming out with that stuff is quite extraordinary, really.
If you're with Host Plus, your super's already in good hands. Plus, you can choose how your money is invested, from low cost to high growth, and plenty of options in between. Control over how your super's invested? That's a plus.
Get your Ride Easter off-roading ready with Repco, with 25% off Rhino Rack Pioneer platforms and accessories.
When you look on as just a reasonable man, as a you know, that's what I regard myself as. I said recently when I did my training as a cub reporter on a local paper, my editor said, "You are the reasonable man. You just represent the other reasonable people. You ask reasonable questions. That's what's expected of you, because reasonable people just want reasonable questions asked." And I think of you in precisely those terms. Just a reasonable man. And when you look at at the enormity of what's happening in and to Iran, where do we end up? Where other countries that have been regime changed and messed with, to put it mildly, just destroyed, ripped to shreds, in that benighted part of the world during the last our lifetimes. Iran is different in that Iran is genuinely it's not some country that was produced as a random shape drawn on a map with pen and paper in the aftermath of the First World War or whatever. Iran, Persia, it's an ancient civilization. Some people would still regard it as one of the oldest civilizations that ever there was. Let's just put that out there. Other people would say no, there are much older civilizations and so on and so on. But nonetheless, conventional history, for what it's worth, would say that Persia, Iran, is an ancient country. And now we've got a sitting president of the United States of America who has moved from saying that they're going to liberate people in Iran to just saying they'll destroy it to the point where nobody can ever live there again.
Yeah, and that was extraordinary, that comment.
That we'll just bomb it. There'll be nothing. There'll be nothing there. And in what universe are we supposed to absorb that, grow some kind of pearl around that grain of sand? Where do we get to if we're supposed to entertain a president who, over a period of time that might be measured in hours, really can go from liberating people to saying, I'll make it so that no one can ever live there again?
It's extraordinary. He's the kid at the checkout whose mum and dad have just said he can't have sweets. He is like a spoilt brat, and so he lashes out, and that's what he's doing now. I don't think the war's going. Not that war ever goes well, but I don't think it's going to plan for him or for Israel, to be honest. And that comment was extraordinary to me because it was the added. It wasn't just I can destroy Iran, so that it can basically never be built back. But it was the fact that he said I can do it in an hour. So you're going, okay, well then you're not referring to conventional weapons. Then you're not referring to what Israel did to Gaza over a period of 2 years. You're referring to within an hour. So you're referring to nuclear weapons then. So now we're at a point where you've started this whole charade based on the fact that Iran can't possibly have a nuclear weapon, and now you're threatening to wipe them out with a nuclear weapon. 90 million people evaporated in an hour. That sort of rhetoric is quite shocking, really. That's straitjacket stuff.
And did you see, I'm sure you have, the Newt Gingrich comment about why are we bothering about the Straits of Hormuz? Why don't we just use 20 nuclear missiles to blast an alternative canal through, and I quote, friendly territory? So, question A, who is presently domiciled in this friendly territory? And B, are you seriously talking about unleashing 10 times what was done in 1945 for the purposes of creating a hole that you can move oil through? And and that's coming from someone who was once a contender for the position of President of the United States of America as well. I don't know.
It is strange. Some of the stuff, like Lindsey Graham's comment as well, when he was laughing and he was talking about we're running out of bombs. He was like, we didn't even run out of bombs in World War II, and everyone's laughing. You're like, well, okay, on one level, that's a real psychopathic statement to make, to be laughing about the fact that you're just dropping bombs everywhere. But you've also just told Iran you're running out of bombs. So I'm not sure how wise that is, to be honest. Like, the whole thing just seems to be an absolute chaos show. But I think that's what it's meant to be. And, when you look at it, obviously, Iran is a giant nation. It's 90 million people. It has a military. It's not Iraq. It's not Afghanistan. It's not Yemen. And they are the biggest regional power that can hold the Greater Israel project back. And so by trying to take out Iran, they're obviously taking out that opposition to it. They're in Lebanon now, annexing southern Lebanon because they're going to take that. They're obviously Syria. They need to be part of that, so they've got their Al Qaeda puppet in charge there. They've already taken Gaza. They're taking the West Bank every single day. And so you look at that Greater Israel map, and you look at all the places that they're going. Iraq again is another one, and you think, oh, it's becoming more and more obvious now, and to such a point where now the Egyptian military has built up a military presence in the Sinai because they know they're next. And so you can see all these things are playing out. And I think, I don't know if they were waiting for Trump, but they've got their man in charge now in terms of going for it. And so I asked the question, because I don't believe in coincidences. I'm not a coincidence theorist. So I don't believe that the Epstein file release and all this kind of stuff, or partial release, and the invasion and attack on Iran are completely disconnected. I don't think they are. I think there is an intrinsic link between the two of them. And so you ask yourself, what kind of secret must you have that takes you from no more foreign wars if you vote for me to I can nuke 90 million people in an hour? How big does the secret have to be to take you from there to there in order to try and keep that secret hidden? And I don't know the answer to that, Neil. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would hazard a guess that it's a pretty big secret.
I find it increasingly difficult to just to limit myself to what sounds like rational explanations for things. That I find it harder and harder to even pretend to myself that I can create for myself, or that at the moment I'm hearing anybody say, provide a thesis that makes geopolitical sense at the moment. Yeah. There's nothing, no foreign policy, policy that, as we would have ever understood it. There's nothing. We're not working towards any kind of rational end point. Nothing like it. And so inevitably, when all of that falls down, it's like that thing where nature abhors a vacuum. And in the absence of any rational explanation, you can't help but start to notice at least what might be categorised as irrational explanations. So you do end up entertaining ideas that what is unfolding now is not the product of 20th century intent, far less 21st century intent, that it's actually an intent that might have been with us for as long as the human species has had the power of speech. Do you know? You start thinking, well, that if it's not about anything that makes rational sense in the way we've been taught history and taught economics and taught politics, then there's an explanation out there somewhere, however seemingly outlandish. Yeah.
I think the idea is to destroy. I think because you're absolutely right. There is no geopolitical sense in any of what's happened. And I've thought this for a while. Like there's the excuse of incompetence and greed and corruption, and of course these things are part of it. But I remember probably a year ago now. Probably wasn't long before we spoke the first time we were talking about digital ID overwhelmingly. And I actually sat down and I wrote a list, because I'd crossed the Rubicon of, no, they are destroying Britain, and this was just Britain, but you can apply it to the world. They are destroying Britain on purpose, right? And so then what I did is I went, right, I'm going to try and put myself in their mindset, right? So if I wanted to destroy Britain, what would I do? And I sat down and I wrote a list of stuff. This is just what I would do. And I literally looked down the list, and it was like every single thing. I was like, they're doing that, they've done that, which has led to that. And I went through the list, and that was quite an epiphany. Was like, wow. And even if you look at energy as an example, because that was one of the lists, like you would destroy your energy infrastructure, which is of course what they've done. And where I am in Derbyshire, just across the Nottinghamshire border, you've got what used to be known as Megawatt Valley, which was on the River Trent. You had all these power stations. They're just blowing them up. They blew up one Cotton a couple of months ago. But this is at a time where we're reliant on places in the Middle East and Russia and Eastern Europe for energy, whilst we're in a conflict of sorts with those regions. So why would you be blowing it up? It doesn't make any sense. and then unless it's intentional to bring it to its knees. And then I looked, because I was trying to get the dates on the Cotton Power Station explosions. I was searching them because obviously they brought down the cooling towers, for something that I was doing on Iconic. I wanted to make sure I got the dates right. And you know how sometimes it just gives you suggested stories off of some of the key words. I realised that there was a plot in the late 1970s and then again in the early 90s, or mid-90s, sorry, 96 I think. And it was a plot by the IRA to do exactly what successive British governments have done, and that was to blow up these power stations. But these plots, so we're told, at least as history tells us, were foiled by the security services, and so they didn't happen. And you're thinking to yourself, if you were an IRA operative who was planning that and got foiled and maybe ended up in prison, you'd be looking at the television news now thinking, well, can I appeal, please? Because I'm in prison for planning to do what you're doing to yourself. So actually, I would have done you a favour. I want a lesser sentence. But that sheer madness of the fact that the British, and it's not just Labour, because it was the same under Boris and everyone else, that successive governments have done to us what a, so-called terrorist organisation was plotting to do to us. That in itself should be a red flag.
Yeah, I mean, I look on it. I grew up very much through. I was the perfect age, really, to be traumatised by proxy by the Troubles in Ireland. Because it was never off the news. You didn't have to wait long before something happened that was attributed to, some or other bit of, the IRA or whoever. So they were the absolute bogeyman, bête noire of my childhood and adolescence and whatever. And I saw all of that. But now I look at it and I think, how really? Was that really the case? Was it really that an organic opposition was, right up until the close of play with the peace talks, so-called, was really what it looked like? Or was it something else entirely? Because, as I understand it, I'm sure I seem to remember that Sinn Féin means something like we ourselves. And now you've got, in the face of whatever's happening in Ireland, to Ireland, in terms of immigration, it's out of control. Well, it's made to look as if it's out of control, but it's it's some sort of coordinated, replacement migration. And Sinn Féin are on board with it. You think, how can the latest iteration of that be now on board with the very antithesis of, Ireland for the Irish? How can so now I think, was the IRA really something else? However it started, I know at the end of the 19th...
What do you think will happen here in Australia? We'll end up run with fucking Israelites.
Century and into the 20s, a desire for a united Ireland and an independent Ireland and all of the rest of it. There may have been an authentic grain of sand at the beginning, but by the time that Tony Blair and the rest of them were talking about peace, what was it really? I now look back on the things that seemed to form so much of the shaping of my childhood and adolescence, and I think, was that just a pantomime as well? Obviously, a good question. A pantomime in which women and children and men on all sides were tortured and murdered and all of the rest of it. I mean, I'm not underestimating for a moment or pretending that the bloodshed wasn't real. But the explanation for it, what we were told about what was happening, was that, which was such a shaping force in my understanding of Britain at that time. Was it a sham?
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate question to ask. If you want to control the game, you control both sides, right? So you control the bad guys and you control the good guys, and you can interchange which one's which at whatever point. And at the end of the day, back then, I was the same as you. It was the Troubles in Northern Ireland. You had bomb attacks in London and Manchester. Going to a city, you'd make sure you weren't stood next to a bin for very long. Like I remember that.
Yeah.
And then Islamic terrorism came along, because that didn't exist. Like in the 80s, there was no such thing as Islamic terrorism. Suddenly that appeared, and we know now how the US, Israel, UK, these people were behind ISIS and ISIL and Daesh and Al Qaeda, whatever they're called this month, and was funding and supporting these mercenaries in Syria and Libya. And you're like, well, yeah, it's a good question. If I know that they're just proxy fronts, yeah, why would I not question if the IRA were either?
And you look into it for 5 minutes and you stumble into territory like Operation Gladio, and the thinking after the end of the Second World War that there were all these cells left behind in Italy and elsewhere to cause to intervene in a moment's notice if Washington or MI6 or whoever needed it to happen, they had already had the people on the ground ready to do it, and then that developed over the years until you got horror shows happening in Spain where scores of civilians were knowingly murdered by what had become of Operation Gladio. And then you fast forward right up until and including having to watch the obscenity of the head chopper in chief out of Syria, Jelani, being playing with Donald Trump in the Oval Office in the White House, being described by the President of the United States as a good-looking young guy with a strong past, and being given a bottle of Trump's own brand aftershave, when anyone paying any attention at all knows that Jelani is the living embodiment of Al-Qaeda, which was the existence of which was the entire justification for the war on terror.
Yeah.
And now Al-Qaeda is someone to be played with like a play date in the White House.
Yeah.
All within the working memory of everybody that saw both things happen.
Exactly. And it's just the madness of it, how you can say that this, Shamama Begum shouldn't be allowed back in the UK, yet he's had a beard trim and he's got himself a nice new suit, nice new aftershave now, I guess, and he's in the White House being entertained and whatever. Like, none of these things make sense. None of them make rational sense, and that's because there is no rationality to any of it. Like, I think Jelani now he's obviously a puppet of the US. He's a puppet of Israel. They wanted rid of Assad because he was very much like whatever people think of Assad. Under Assad, like, Syria was very much like Iran in that it was a foe that would counteract the balance of power in the Middle East. Counteract Israel and the US and stuff, and so he had to go, and obviously that's what they've done. But I also think when they give you these bogeymen, like they did when he was in Al Qaeda, then they give you a good guy because he's had a beard trim and a suit and got some aftershave on. That doesn't mean that further down the line, Jelani doesn't become a bad guy again. Suddenly he starts killing people in Syria, and they go, oh, we have to go in and sort him out. And then obviously, they annex more land and build a greater Israel and whatever. And I think that's what they do with these people. It's the same with the Taliban. The Taliban were great. They were great because they were fighting against the Soviets. So we're on their side, they're on our side. Then, oh no, we need a baddie now. Okay, well 9/11, right? Well, yeah, Taliban, Osama bin Laden, bad guy. And then Americans spent 20 years in Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban.
So sometimes I feel as if now it's not funny, but you kind of have to laugh, because there is nothing else, gallows humour and all that. Sometimes I feel the aspects of the behaviour of people up to and including, whatever, Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, whoever, Ursula von der Leyen.
I'm Rebecca White. Growing up on a farm, I learned to work hard and never give up. As a mum of two, I'm fighting for our community in Canberra, for better housing.
It reminds me of the feeling of The Office. Now bear with me. Where like the David Brent character would do something like, when there was the sponsored dance that was going to raise lots of money for good causes, and there was a successful, good-looking dancing couple in the office, and then Brent insisted that he could dance too, and he performed that thing that became a meme. It became an endlessly repeated clip on social media, David Brent dancing in that ludicrous way, which happens against there's a silent reception of it as incomprehensible behaviour. And the humour of The Office was very much that curated choreographed, painful to watch.
Yeah.
But it wasn't by accident that it was so painful to watch. The instinct was almost to switch it over, even though you were just watching a comedy, a sitcom. It was so unbearable to watch. And now I feel that translates across to watching somebody like Donald Trump on Air Force One talking to the assembled media. It's like watching, you think, I can't bear to watch this.
Yeah.
He must be embarrassed to the point of wanting to curl up in a corner and die. But no, he copes with the gag reflex and muscles on through it and keeps on going.
Yeah. He is the reality TV show president. I mean, I find him awkward, but he's yet, for me at least, to go beyond his comments after Charlie Kirk was killed, where, he described Charlie Kirk as like a son to him and all this kind of stuff. And the reporter, who, quite a nice question, was like, "How are you holding up, Mr. President?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm fine. We're building a new ballroom. Have you seen?" And you're like, "Oh, wow. That's extraordinary. Like, that's next level." I mean, I don't know what stage of grief that is. Maybe a similar stage of grief to pyrotechnics, which seems to be everything that is surrounding Charlie Kirk's death. It's extraordinary. But the awkwardness I felt watching that, it was very much like, The Office, dance, same thing, just bizarre.
You raise the spectre of, Charlie Kirk. Whatever on earth happened to that man in that place on that day, and all I know is that I don't know what happened to that man on that day in that place, except that I know it wasn't that Tyler Robinson shot him from 150 metres away with a 30-06. That's the least likely explanation of the million explanations that I've heard. But then obviously you drift into the Erica Kirk territory and you watch that. You watch, like you say, the pyrotechnics, everything about that memorial. We saw bits of that. When I say we, I mean my wife and I and my kid. We saw bits of the immediate aftermath of what might have been expected to be mourning for a loved father and friend and dad and all the rest of it, and husband, and yet it was what it was, whatever on earth that was.
Yeah, it was a Super Bowl halftime show. It was extraordinary.
And we watched it and looked at one another and like again, I had to, the eyes to heaven and that young man and all that stuff. I can't watch this.
Yeah.
But we were simultaneously watching people watching it, thinking that it was moving. And you go, are we in parallel universes here? Are you watching the same spectacle that I'm watching and finding it authentic? Because that's the noises coming out of you. And I'm watching it thinking, I need to reach for the remote control to just make this go away. I can't bear this. And Trudy said, and she has said numerous times, my wife, that because we know that we're dealing with psychopathy, we're dealing with psychopaths, that the thing that we know that psychopaths can't really convincingly do is they don't experience human emotion, so they're not good at doing it, because they're only approximating it, they're not actually feeling it. They actually don't have that empathy. They're not feeling what they're pretending to project.
No, so they tend to go too far.
So we say to each other, why would you cast that person in that acting role? Because at the very least, if you're going to make it a performance, you need a really good actor. And yet what we seemed to be given, as far as I'm concerned, with Erica Kirk, was, apart from anything else, a really unconvincing actor. So,
Life's simple, just you and the waves, but soreness can hold you back. BioGland Active Magnesium eases muscle tension when dietary intake isn't adequate to get you back out there. Choose BioGland for the ways of today and tomorrow.
who's running this show? Who's the showrunner for this performance? Because this is the acting job of a lifetime. This is a big part. at least audition someone that can act.
Yeah, it needed Daniel Day-Lewis. We got kind of Hollyoaks, didn't we? To be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think also...
It's that obvious. So you play five-dimensional chess with it all the time. You're looking at it and thinking, well, I'm just this aforementioned reasonable guy. I don't have superpowers. I don't have any special abilities. I've just lived the life I have, and I've watched what I've watched. But all the things that I have watched in my reasonable life so far have easily equipped me to think, that emperor's not wearing any clothes.
No. But then again, I come back to the same thing. Like, I wonder how much they care. It's almost like they know we know, and they don't care that we know, because there's an element of it which is, what are you going to do about it, mate? And there's also an element of it where I think everything is a contract, I think, between the people and these demons, that basically what we accept is our, exactly that, it's us accepting it, it's us signing on the dotted line, really. And so what the contract we're offered is, at the moment, is basically, you work your backside off in a job you hate, the state will take a big chunk of your money and use it to blow up kids abroad, all the while people in positions of power are abusing children. And you know that, and we know you know that, and you're not doing anything about it. And as long as people aren't doing anything about it, then it will continue to go on.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with Pauline and that, going over to Mar-a-Lago with Gina Reinhardt and the Epstein class. Comes back over here. Well, she's been going over there a couple of times, going to Thailand and having secret meetings. Well, and you think she's some kind of Australia's saviour? It's just Donald Trump with tits. Saggy ones at that. Sorry, but she doesn't have the scruples. There's somebody else behind her. Probably why they wear wiretaps. The ones they showed me, not the ones I'm imagining. No, people have got a memory like 2 seconds long. Oh, but that doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. Of course it does.
And that's why I think it's quite a crucial point at the moment. Like, all this stuff is bubbling away and it's coming out. And, you know, even with Charlie Kirk, I don't think his death is disconnected from the Iran war either. You know, he had the ear of a lot of young people in America, particularly conservatives. And he was very opposed to the war in Iran. And, you know, that was evidenced the last time. Well, now he's out the way. It's very different. So, you know, you suddenly, people like Ben Shapiro have got the ear of the youth. And that guy, you know, he's never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. So, you know, the game's changed slightly. But I do wonder about that kind of almost that contractual thing between the people and the state, of like what we're willing to accept. If we don't say anything or do anything, and we just go along with it, even if we don't want to, it's like, yeah, it's rubbish, isn't it? But, you know, apart from whinge on Facebook, what are you doing about it?
What is the something that anyone's supposed to do? You know,
well, that's the point. That's the toughest bit, isn't it? It's
people close to me say, oh, there'll be a civil war, or there'll be whatever. And I don't think so, because I think that's been too bred out of people. I think there's been too many generations of, well, certainly emasculated men, that there's not. I don't see people taking purposefully and meaningfully to the streets for armed combat with the, you know, with the establishment. I just don't see it happening. I don't think they have the tools. I don't think they certainly don't have the weapons. What are they going to do? You know, running for a bus would be beyond a lot of them. So I think, so it's not likely. You know that. You know, it's not like you know, the Revolutionary War in America you know. It's not going to be that. The people are not armed and equipped and trained from boyhood to do that. So what is the something?
Well, I think in terms of that civil war, what's interesting with that is obviously if there was a civil war, then that would be perfect for the establishment, because, you know, you could just bring in all kinds of draconian measures to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they want. And whether it happens or not doesn't really make a difference, because they can still tell us it's happening. They can still show us footage of things and make people believe them. Look at COVID. You know, the hospitals are war zones. They weren't, but people believed it. And so all you need to do is plant that seed. I think, to be honest, you've got you've probably got 4 groups within society. You've got psychopaths, which make up an absolutely tiny minority, thankfully. Most of them in positions of power, probably. And then you've got these 3 elements within society where, you know, I think you've got people that are kind of totally clueless to what's going on. And even if they did know, probably don't really care, to be honest. They're sat at home watching Cash in the Attic or Bargain Hunt or whatever. They're fine. They're dealt with. And then you've got others at the other end of the spectrum which are very angry and are willing to chuck a rock at a copper or throw a Molotov cocktail at a police wagon or whatever. They're great too, because you can send the boys in and deal with them. And then I think you've got this large portion of society which, within different stages, is aware that something's going on. They might not, you know, go as far down the rabbit hole as others within that group, but everyone kind of knows this isn't right. And so it's what that majority of people do. Do they bury their head in the sand and go to Bargain Hunt, or do they get very angry and smash the place up? I think the establishment's happy with either of those. So it's what this large group in the middle do.
What would be the useful thing? What would be the most constructive and discouraging and problematic for that establishment?
Non-compliance. Civil non-compliance, peaceful non-compliance, not going along with it, not doing it, not going to pay my taxes for you to bomb kids in Iran, not doing it. And if enough people do that, because again, it's a numbers game all the time. But we've been sort of had this apathy sort of bred into us of like, 1, well, that can't work, and 2, well, they'll do what they want anyway. Well, not really, because if you just look at it on a base level, every time you turn on the TV, they are gaslighting you, they're propagandizing you, they're like politicians, talking heads, that they are trying to get you to perceive the world in a certain way, so you behave in a certain way and accept their version of reality. Well, if they didn't have to do that, they wouldn't do that. If they could just steamroller over the people, then they would, because it's a hell of a lot easier. But the numbers are against them, so they have to hoodwink the population into basically either accepting or demanding what they want to introduce.
Wait, there's a peanut inside me? Nice. M&M's. It's more fun together.
Discover Purina One with prebiotic fibre and help support your dog's healthy gut microbiome. Take a closer look. A healthy inside shows on the outside. Purina One. Visible health for life.
So if we can just take a step back, and instead of reacting emotionally, you know, when something happens, instead of that fight or flight reptilian brain kicking in and suddenly, you know, someone needs to do something, more state powers, that actually we take a breath and go, right, wait a minute, okay, what's going on here really? Okay, who gains from this? Why would someone do that? Why was, like now, for instance, they're talking about Iran sleeper cells killing British people in Britain, killing Americans in Britain. Why would Iran do that? They've got no reason to do it. That would gather support for the war on Iran. That's not good for Iran. At the moment, there's no support for it, so it's exactly how they would want it. So there's no geopolitical reason for them to do that. So if you go, right, well, I'm going to take a step back, who would gain from it? Well, the US would gain from it, Israel would gain from it, the military-industrial complex would gain from it. All right, okay, well, maybe we look in that direction. So I think if people are a little bit more streetwise, a little bit more kind of, right, let's breathe before, you know, jump into a conclusion or a reaction. And then non-compliance with the state. And I always go back to March 2020. You imagine when Boris Johnson messed all his air up on purpose and came out and said, we're locking you down, your businesses are closed. Imagine if 30% of the population, or even 20% of the businesses in the UK went, no, not doing it, mate. I'm not doing it. Like, simple as that. You're saying that essential businesses can remain open. Well, my business feeds my kids, so it's essential. So therefore, it's staying open. If 20% of the population's businesses in the UK did that, lockdowns wouldn't have happened. But unfortunately, at the beginning everyone did and started following arrows around Tesco, and suddenly we were on the back foot as terms of a protest movement trying to fight back. From the beginning, people had said no.
Do you think because we're kind of agreed that we're all watching David Brent doing his robot dance, now that level of desperation, so that the leader of the free world is reheating 40 beheaded babies, and he's the commander of his armed forces is saying the obviously psychopathic things that he's saying. Is that because is that level of disarray a good thing for us? Because there's an awareness that they can't do the next thing, or they can't repeat what they did before with COVID. They can't lock down. That if they go for military-inspired lockdowns, martial law, are they worried that they can't go to that move because this time people will go, I don't think so, or not, because it is the $64,000 question, isn't it?
I think it can be two things at the same time. I think it's a good thing, but I think it's a dangerous thing at the same time. I think it's good that the rats are being cornered, but that's when the rats are at their most dangerous because they lash out. And, I use that terminology intentionally because, Epstein even said in the files that when Trump is cornered like a rat, he will attack Iran. And it's there in black and white. Like, I feel like the rats are being cornered somewhat. And that is a good thing. People are waking up to stuff. There's conversations that we have now, everyday conversations in the local shop, that if you tried to have 30 years ago, they'd have wanted you in a padded cell.
This conversation that you and I are having right now, I can't. 5 years ago, anyway, certainly, if not less, I could not have imagined being my half of this conversation.
No, that's the thing.
If you'd shown me it in a dream, I would have said, no, never going to happen. But that's where I am now. Well, I'm saying the things that I'm saying. I never would.
Yeah.
And again, I say I'm a reasonable person. So the number of reasonable people that must be having they're not having their conversations in the form of a podcast, but they must be having these conversations saying, this is off the charts nonsense.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's gone from, if you said certain things that we've said today 5-10 years ago, you'd have got called a maniac, a conspiracy theorist, whatever. Whereas now you have the same conversation and people go, yeah, I know. So that's a good thing, like that's changing. But then, like I say, when the rat is cornered, that's when it lashes out.
One of the great, Trudy and I, we often, we watch you, we love the stuff that you do when you're in the countryside. And I know it's inspired by the fact that you came from a place at whatever point in your life where you were just interested in history and interested in going to see history and walking among it, which is another of the common threads that you and I have together. We're both motivated by the same thing. Does it still work for you? I mean, do you do that where you walk around with your whatever it is, a camera on the end of a stick, and you point out the local, and then you talk about the global, and the two things, and the two things just become an extremely therapeutic cocktail for your audience. But do you? I know what it does for me, but does it still do it for you?
Yeah, it's my sanity, mate. To be honest, I still play ice hockey, like I still play sport and stuff, and that's still like fun. But I think just getting out into nature, disconnecting from, I'm holding a camera, but you're still disconnected from the technology. You're not in a Wi-Fi field in your studio or house or whatever, and you just connect with stuff. And I don't plan any of those things. Like I will just, apart from, hello everyone, hope you're well, I don't know anything else that I'm about to say for the next sort of 15-20 minutes. There's certain things that will be in my head in terms of what's happened that day, if something's happened in the news or whatever, but it is just a therapeutic thing for me to just have a conversation with, I guess, whoever's listening. Like, I don't know who's listening. Well, I know you're listening now, so now I'll be aware of having a conversation with you, which is great. Like, and that's all that is to me. But I find that, that's what people say, isn't it? Talking, talk things out. If you've got an issue, if you've got a problem, if you're thinking something, a problem shared is a problem halved, or whatever, that whole thing. It's a little bit like that for me. as well. Like I'm just talking to the audience, and after I've talked for 15, 20 minutes, yeah, I feel better. Like I've got that off my chest, some thoughts, and now I feel liberated by expressing them. And the connection to nature, I find, helps. I don't think I would get the same thing from it if I, pressed record now and said, "Hi everyone, how you doing?" and start speaking like this. It wouldn't feel the same. I tried to do that, like I did some stuff in the studio, but I just feel more at home in the country. And from the comments from subscribers to Iconic and even on the YouTube, they agree. Like you just seem more yourself when you're outside. I'm like, right, well, that's me then.
Yeah, no, honestly, it does. It's work. I'm pleased to hear it's working for you, because it certainly works for me. And therapeutic is right. And we've been talking together for a better part of an hour and a half, and for me, it's gone by like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like we've just bumped into each other in the street, each on the way to our respective destinations. So, round at your place next time.
Definitely.
I'll come to you. I'll come to yours for the next one. But in the meantime, for that therapy session, Gareth Icke, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks.
That was well worth watching, wasn't it? We mustn't forget. We mustn't forget. Like, he's right. I'm old enough to remember everything they're talking about myself, and how the whole we didn't have a radical Islam thing. I refuse to believe that we do. We don't. We have a radical Western convert issue. A radical immigration issue. It's not radical Islam. That's because it's not Islam. It's just a bunch of radical fruitcakes. You can't have radical Islam. You either have Islam or a bunch of radical people reading the Quran. It's no different to if you'd say, like Erin Nolan dribbling her shit about radical Christians. Well, no, it's not. You see, the people who follow the faith of Jesus Christ, God, or the radical people who read the Bible. It's a whole kidnapped, made-up scenario that's been created by the government. They invited these people in the first place. It's the government. Okay, it's our government that created this problem for us. For us and those people. We shouldn't be each other's enemy. I didn't do it to them. They didn't do it to me. We didn't do it to one another. It's all government. Or whatever that is that was supposed to have been done. I wasn't there. I'd say they weren't either, because they were here. Australian people converting to Islam were obviously getting something from it. Well, they wouldn't convert otherwise, would they? It's either improving their life or they're getting something to pretend that they're that way. See, when we talk about all those radical groups, they're militias. It's not a genuine faith. It's a militia. A militia is a homegrown military group, just like in America. A well-maintained militia to fight against government tyranny. The Second Amendment. What is it? A well-regulated militia to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. You see, this is what will happen. Everyone's blaming Muslims, and who can tell the difference between us, I'm talking about us ignorant Aussies, who can tell the difference between a Muslim and an Israelite? We can't. We don't know the difference. We're ignorant to that. We just be careful, because who's all running around with their Israel fucking flags draped around their necks and the little pins on their lapels. Create a problem just so that they can. Well, you can't speak up against the Israelites. Oh, Jews, that's anti-Semitic. Well, all Muslims are Semites. All the Arab nations are Semites. Anyway, it's late. It's 11:30. Night night.